featuring the connectors that deal prominently with the audio signal. Here's the connectors we're going to deal with in this lesson. The phone connectors. One connector called the RCA or phono, more commonly called RCA, but the correct technical designation is phono connector. There's a connector called XLR used to connect cables to transfer audio cables. In high-end home entertainment systems, there's the optical audio connector. There's also other connectors I should just mention briefly, the HDMI, DVI, IEEE 1394, otherwise known as DV or FireWire, and the SCART connector. These do carry audio and are used today, but they also carry video, so they're going to be addressed in the monitors lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in one by one and cover briefly each of these different kinds of audio connectors. First up, we have the phone family, and it got its name because these connectors, the one at the far right, were actually used, it was a slight variation, but were actually used in the early days of the telephone to connect one exchange with another, to connect one household or business with another. The operator would sit at her switchboard and would put the connector, put the phone plug into the port for one phone and put it into the port or the connection, the jack for another phone, thereby connecting two phones. So the operator had a big job back in the days of telephone technology. Back in the early days of telephone technology. So the operator had a big part to play back in the early days of telephone technology. So you see four different phone connectors here, and we're going to go through them one by one. On the far right, and they relate to the size, is the 1/4-inch phone. Then next to it, we have two variations of what's called the Miniphone, sometimes called the 1/8-inch Mini. There's a stereo and a mono. We'll be covering that. And on the far left, we have the Submini connector. First of all, the 1/4-inch phone connector. We're not seeing this connector around too much anymore, at least not in circles that most of us deal with. There are applications of this. This is used still to connect some musical instruments. So, electrical pianos, that kind of thing, electrical bass, electric guitar may plug into an amplifier using this cable or connector. Some headphones still use this connector, though they've largely been replaced by their little brothers or sisters. Again, this is called the 1/4-inch phone connector, and for metrics, it is the 6.35 millimeter phone connector. It has a jack and a plug, and again, it is sometimes used primarily around musical instruments. The next phone connector, we call this the Miniphone, otherwise known as the 1/8-inch phone or the 1/8-inch Miniphone, and in metrics it is the 3.5 millimeter. On the right, we see two variations of the Miniphone plug. There are two versions of the plug, and in the next screen, I'll differentiate between them and tell you why. On the left, we see two ports, two jacks, two receptacles where the phone plug gets plugged in. This is something many of us see nowadays on our computers, okay? And it is commonly used for microphone connections, for not really expensive microphones. It is for more affordable, cheap, and expensive microphones, as well as lots and lots of applications with headphones, earbuds, that kind of thing. In fact, the connections you have on most smartphones, that would be a 1/8-inch Miniphone. Most of us who have a desktop or lap computer with a headphone jack are using also a 1/8-inch Miniphone connector for those headphones. So let's distinguish here. On the top, we have what's called a tip ring connection. It might be difficult to see, but if you come in here, take a look at this. See, there's one metal tip at the end, and then what they call the ring. And it's hard to see, but there's actually a kind of a plastic separator or insulator between these two. Remember in the previous lesson when we talked about the foundations of technology with cables and connectors, there is a center conductor. The cable in the center of the cable itself connects to this inside tip. the shielding around the outside connects to the ring. So it actually has two different channels or paths. For the most part, the outer ring is used as a shield against interference. This is called a mono or monaural connector. It delivers, if you're plugging in a pair of headphones or earphones and using this kind of a connector, it will give you the same signal in both the left and right ear, or the left and right speaker. In the bottom, we see an example of a stereo connector. That is a stereo Miniphone connector. You can see there's a tip, just like the earlier one, but there's a ring and a sleeve. There's three separate distinct parts rather than the two we see in the top portion. So that means there's two signals inside plus the shield. So there is the capacity to provide a true stereo separation. So you can have a separate signal in the left speaker or the left ear and its counterpart in the right speaker or the right ear. In fact, coming out the back of the cable, you might be able to see there's actually two separate leads here that carries the stereo signal. The last member of the phone family is the smallest. This is called the Submini connector. So it's smaller than the Mini, and it measures at 2.5 millimeters, and it has some applications largely for some specialized headphones in small devices, like those little portable digital dictation devices, things like that. Though the electronics industry is moving largely to standardize on the Mini connector, you will see this from time to time. So if you're trying to fit a Mini plug into a device and it's not fitting, it appears to be too large, it is very likely, if you don't have the instruction book and can look it up, but it's very likely you need to get an adapter that will take you from a Sub-Mini into a standard Mini. One more variation of the Minis. This is what we'll find with Apple. Now, this is common if you have an iPod. You'll notice on the left here, we have the Mini that is a ring tip and sleeve, providing you with a stereo signal in your earbud and your earpiece. On the right, this is the plug that goes with the Apple iPhone. And other smartphones have something just like this. So we have the tip, we have two rings, and a sleeve. Now what this gives us is, again, we have the jacket for interference. We have two connections for stereo left and right, and we also have a connection for the microphone. That's why it's important if you have a smartphone to use one of these, because there actually is a microphone embedded in the cable. So it not only allows for stereo listening, but it also provides the capacity to deliver a microphone signal to the telephone part of your smartphone. All right, moving away from the phone family, we move over to the phono. Now, this was called phono because this particular connector was actually developed by the RCA company. Okay? And the RCA company in the 1920s in America, as you may know, were big proponents of the phonograph, which we call, most of us, a record player. And these connectors were used predominantly with the phonographs, connecting the phonograph to the other components. Now, since it was developed by the RCA company, you can see that's why it's its nickname. A lot of times, even in stores, you'll see the package labeled as RCA connectors. It is correctly called phono, but we use RCA phono almost interchangeably. On the left, you see a grouping of 3 phono or RCA plugs. And I show that because that's commonly how a lot of people are used to seeing that, particularly if you're connecting your home entertainment system. Typically, the yellow connector is used for composite video. So this same connector can and is used for composite video. It is a low resolution, low quality transfer of the video signal. It is not the most ideal. When we get to the video section, we'll be talking in greater detail about that. But because we're talking about audio only, really, I would be using the white and red connectors here. But it matters not which color you use as long as you match the colors on both ends. On the right, you see an example of a panel for a home entertainment system where you can connect your phono or phonograph, the tuner, CD players, or your video cables, tape 1, tape 2, adapter, etc. And these are examples of the RCA or phono jack. Okay, this is on the chassis, on the device itself, where you plug the cables in. Now, one quick tip. When you're plugging and unplugging phono cables, they can twist. There's no damage by twisting the cable on the device. In fact, when I plug it in, I gently but firmly press the cable in and twist it to make sure it goes all the way in. And I find it easier to remove the connectors, easier to remove the plug from the jack if you gently twist while you're pulling it away. It helps to kind of, I don't know why, but it does help to release the cable a little bit smoother. Moving on, the next audio connector is called XLR, and you can see that there are 3 pins and 3 receptacles, 3 prongs that are part of this connector here. The XLR connector, most typically used for professional audio installations. It is still an analog audio source, and it does allow for shielded audio. So it does provide a great deal of protection against interference. This is something, if you pay attention really closely, the next time you go to a concert, to a band performing at a live event, they will use XLR connectors for their microphones, to run for the instruments long distances, even using XLR cables to go from the stage to the sound mixer, from the sound mixer to the amplifier and speakers, etc. Now, it is possible, and I should just say this as well, for them, they use what's called a snake. And here's a picture of a snake that has multiple XLR jacks and multiple XLR connectors that go, for example, from a stage down to the audio mixer. So instead of stringing a whole bunch of individual cables, they run this snake from point A to point B, and it has all the connections for the audio engineer and its team. Now, we will also be seeing in the adapter section how you can adapt so that you can take different kinds of microphones that are not set up to use XLR technology and adapt them so they will fit, and vice versa. One of the newer connectors used in the realm of audio is what we call the optical connector. You primarily will see this in high-end home entertainment systems, some of the smart TV systems that have integrated speakers, etc. On the right, we see a plug, and on the left, we see a jack. So there is an actual connection, and the signal is digitally transferred over the cable, kind of in the way that fiber optics works, and that's why you see that red light on the left. Primarily, the signal is transferred into a digital optical signal and transferred for a really high-quality transfer of sound. So that's a look at the most common audio connectors that are used nowadays. There are additional specialized audio connectors. If you have a device that falls into that realm, I would recommend checking the owner's manual. And if you have